In our last episode, our illustrious heroes did battle with some random mining security forces and recovered some of Cyclo's lost AI. With Derek Gage coming in clutch for the double kill at the end, the party was able to annihilate most everything standing in their way and get out of the mines fairly quickly. Now, they've taken a new job on for Cyclo and are currently traveling through Blink space as Derek embarks on a personal errand. The autopilot beeped in Word as it processed Gage's coordinates. He swatted at Edward's data slate as Lee recorded the location and streamed it to Levy and Jeremy. Meanwhile, the group's new helper, Drone 37H4N, affectionately referred to as Ethan, was observing the squabble. Blink space travel was initiated and the entire display of the ship went white as everything blurred past. Gage sighed and stood up slowly. He looked at Edward, and then he pulled out his own data slate and made a phone call. He had it with these idiots. He couldn't do this anymore. Being a mercenary just wasn't for him. So he swallowed his pride and prepared to grovel. His data slate's communicator connected, and the CEO of the Smith Shimano Corporation answered. He told Gage that this had better be good. He was on his yearly 2-month vacation to his private holiday world. If you're wondering how a bum like Derek met someone so politically important, it was at a release party for one of the movies. He got invited to the vacation world at some point, and to make a long story short, Derek still had the location and contact information buried deep inside of his contacts. Back to the story. Gage apologized and walked a little faster into a random maintenance closet. He asked if the two could negotiate a reinstatement of Gage's previous spokesmanship role. The CEO was unimpressed, but then Derek said that he'd bring the corpo, the notorious outlaw Edward Lee, alive. See, Edward's a liar. He'd been thinking of ways to gas up his own reputation as a master criminal. So with some basic hacking training, he started developing a habit of invading databases that housed information on people and altering facts about himself to both exaggerate his deeds and his height. He's short, he's like 5'6". As the SSC is obsessed with furthering human evolution, they keep a catalog of people across the galaxy for genetic use across their many eugenics worlds. When Edward hacked their system, it fucked up their entire selection algorithm. All this because the man wanted to be thought of as 5'8". This information caught the CEO's interest. He'd made no guarantees, but he said he'd at least be willing to talk without shooting Gage on sight. Derek smiled, gave an ETA, and then the connection terminated. Derek Gage considered it a score and then emerged from his closet, much happier to see Edward and Ethan Drone just looking at him. He chuckled again, smiled a little bit wider, and then tackled Edward to the ground. Levy and Jeremy, still being fed a video by Edward's data slate and Ethan's camera, were simultaneously shocked and laughing absurdly hard. Derek started to monologue. He talked about the life he had, the life he'd lost, how he'd been disrespected and treated like trash by basically everyone, hell, including us. And he talked about how Edward was going to help him get it all back. At this point, both ships had exited Blink space and were making their descent towards the planet. Derek restrained Edward and landed a good 15 minutes or so before Levy and Jeremy, and led Edward to a 2-story mansion overlooking a cliff that towered over a beach below. A paved path lined with palm trees led to a massive driveway, and eventually the mansion itself. Off to the side was a small hangar, presumably for the CEO's extensive security forces. With how time works in the Lancer universe, one single CEO wasn't a massive deal in the grand scheme of things, but, political power still matters. It was important to make sure their boss wasn't just killed by any random sicko, right? Even if the world's location was pretty hard to find. It wasn't even on any existing maps. It took some awkward finagling with the gun and the Edward in his hands for Derek to ring the doorbell, but eventually he was let into the mansion by an absolute wall of a person. Whoever they were, the SSC clearly had them juiced up on something chemical or cybernetic because the bastard towered over Gage. I'm speaking in vague terms because it was impossible to tell anything about them due to the fact that they were covered head to toe in tactical gear, body armor, and an opaque black visor. They were obviously human, but gave off almost robot vibes. With the soldiers' help, Derek had a much easier time getting Edward to follow him into the house. Once they arrived upstairs in the CEO's office, Edward and Gage were given a thorough pat-down for any weapons. Upon making sure the men were unarmed, sans Gage's pistol from earlier, the soldier moved to guard the door, and Edward was released. Negotiations could begin. A shaft of sunlight from the window illuminated the study. It reflected off of dust in the air, dust on the shelves, and the CEO's polished wooden desk. Gage covered his eyes and began to make his case. He felt that his life as a Lancer was going poorly. He knew when to quit. Better try and work out another solution than risk his life any more than he'd need to. As persuasively as he could, Derek Gage practically begged to have his old spokesman job back. He had a history with the company, and with his biggest controversies being some time in the past, it would be good for him to return now. He wouldn't even have to be the face immediately, just something small to get him back on his feet. He could work his way back up to prominence and stardom again later. The CEO sat back in his chair, put his fingers together. He thought about Derek's offer a little bit, looked down at his desk, flipped through some papers, checked a few things on a data slate, and he sighed. Gage had brought Edward back and clearly cared about his image and the company's. It was hard for him to think through it though, as Edward started laying into Gage for betraying him. He asked what his problem was about 57 times. Every time the CEO had a coherent thought process, it was broken up by some variation of, "Are you insane?" The CEO took a deep breath and finally leaned forward. Outside, Levy and Jeremy landed and followed the path Gage had taken. Once they reached the cliffside clearing with the mansion, Levy instructed Jeremy to wait at the tree line in case something went wrong. No guards were patrolling the perimeter, but Levy assumed security would be there inside the house. However, the threat of being shot on sight was hardly enough to deter Levy DeMeo. They just had to know what the hell Derek and Edward were up to. Using their mobility hardsuit, Levy boosted up to a wall right next to a window on the second floor. SSC's big man had picked this planet as a personal resort, so the temperature was pretty warm. As such, at least one window had to be open. Luckily, Levy found one that didn't have an alarm sensor on it and slipped through. They touched down in an old maroon rug, and they rolled into the nearest corner both to stay out of sight and to dampen the sound of their landing. Creeping through the halls, Levy was surprised to not find any guards. It made sense given the fact that this planet wasn't even on any star charts. It was pretty well hidden. The coordinates were encrypted too. Levy remembered Gage doing something with the input to get the final warp gate location set. Finally hearing something, which turned out to be Lee's yelling, Levy snuck up to a half-open door. Judging by the shadow peering out into the hall, there was someone guarding it. Guard or not, it was best for Levy to remain unnoticed as they listened in on Gage and the CEO's conversation. The executive cleared his throat and silenced the escalating argument between Gage and Lee. He spoke slowly and deliberately, explaining to Derek that while he appreciated the enthusiasm and gift, he couldn't just reinstate his former position. Gage stammered and said that surely at least something could be arranged. The CEO sighed again and explained that even though he technically was in charge of the company, he couldn't just do whatever Gage asked without impunity. He had investors and a board of other directors and executives to work with, and to answer to. There was just too much on the line. Derek Gage was a liability and a has-been who would have only hurt the SSC's pristine image. How could he represent such an important political force when he didn't even have the professionalism to remove that gaudy mask in a business meeting? Derek grimaced, but he caught sight of something. Peering over the CEO's head, Gage saw something framed next to the window. Squinting through his mask's eye holes, he finally figured out what the picture was. It was a movie poster. A poster of a chiseled man with a jawline like an actual brick. It was a rectangle, I swear. And a blonde flat-top haircut. Think like Duke Nukem if he was even more roided out. The movie poster had an explosion behind the lead actor and had a big bold text reading Burn Notice 2, starring Randy the Runaway Rocket, sponsored by SSC. They fucking replaced him. Him, Derek Gage. They replaced him in his own movie series. His forehead started to sweat. He swallowed. The lump in his throat almost choked him as he forced it down. He couldn't tell if he was feeling humiliation or rage. He managed to get some words out about him even bringing Edward, but the CEO pointed out that bringing Lee didn't guarantee him a job. He never said he'd give Derek his spot back, only that he wouldn't shoot him on sight for showing up. Behind the mask, Derek was scowling. He had enough. It was time to leave. He tried taking Edward with him before the guard stepped forward. The CEO explained that the deal was finished. Gage brought Edward, they'd talked, and the talk was over. Now, Edward would stay and face God knows what punishment. There was nothing Gage could do. Before things got worse, Levy burst into the room, yelling something about something being wrong with the ship. They called Derek Mr. Gage, and when questioned by the CEO, they explained that they were Gage's bodyguard and something required his immediate attention. They swore. Levy ignored the CEO's demands to know how they got into the building and Gage's assertions that he'd never met them before. Levy just scooped up Edward, grabbed Gage's arm, and booked it out of the room while the guard was still confused. They ran down the stairs and out the door. The guard was about to shoot them, but the CEO, who was now standing and looking over the banister at the entryway, stopped him. He was exasperated. He was just glad to get them out of his house, and he half-heartedly shouted something about never even thinking about coming back or contacting him again if they wanted to live, yada yada yada. Once outside, Levy asked what they'd missed, which started another, much louder shouting match between Derek and Edward. Edward almost died. Gage had lost everything, and both of them felt that the other was to blame for the entire mess. At this point, Jeremy ran out from the tree line and asked what was wrong. Levy just looked at him and gestured over to the now screaming duo. Suddenly, Derek stopped yelling. The actor walked away towards his ship, and then he paused. He took out his data slate, tapped away for a little bit, and then spoke an unheard command. He put the device away. A flock of birds took flight in the distance. The breeze shook, and the ground vibrated faintly, and Derek Gage jumped into the air. At the pinnacle of his arc, he was caught by the tiger blood, and he was placed into the cockpit. Our comm channel lit up with incoherent screaming as the mech used its heavy charge blade to tear apart both stories of the house. It was just a flurry of action. An alarm briefly sounded before Gage hacked a chunk out of whatever building it came from. The sound stopped. A few guards tried to run for the hangar to the side of the building. Gage destroyed that too. Probably stepped on some of the defense force now that I think about it. By the end of his tantrum, Gage was standing alone in a pile of eviscerated rubble. His heavy breathing on the radio was all that we heard, before his Everest walked back to us and powered down. Gage got out while an AI that sounded like an exuberant kid exclaimed how awesome the whole charade was. He had a weird relationship with his NHP, forgot about that. Everyone was taken aback. Obviously this had consequences for the rest of us, but we didn't know what to do. Rubble is obviously evidence, and anything that's cut can tell you a lot about who cut it based on how. So, unfortunately, deciding that killing Gage and leaving was out of the question, Levy went into the forest. They came back shortly with their suit, and used its new missile systems to turn what was eviscerated rubble into far finer exploded rubble. Blasts are harder to analyze and trace than sword strikes after all. There was no question that everyone inside the house was dead, but what really sealed the deal was that the missiles ended up triggering a landslide, as the cliff face that the house was perched on collapsed into the water below. Levy got out of the Sky Chaser, satisfied, only to see Edward holding a pistol at Derek's head. We tried to talk him down, but Edward wasn't having it. He screamed something or other about what Gage had done. Edward explained that Gage's hubris not only had gotten him killed, but this new outburst would get everyone else killed even harder. No amount of talking would get him to stand down, and with all of us unable to stop him, he unloaded his entire magazine into Derek Gage's chest. We were all too far away from him. There was nothing we could do. I have to break the immersion for a second to bring something up. A pistol, or a light pilot signature weapon, deals 1 damage. Gage, in-game, was wearing an assault hardsuit, which has 1 point of armor. Armor in Lancer is flat damage reduction. So, as Edward screamed and tried to blow several holes into Derek's chest, all he succeeded in doing was bouncing off Gage's armor repeatedly. 1 damage minus 1 armor is 0 damage, unfortunately. He loaded another magazine and tried again. The player really wanted Gage to die. It was in character, it made sense. Still didn't work though. Levy, getting tired of this, pulled out their own gun and put it to Edward's head. This was too shitty of a situation for all of us to kill each other. We were going to leave, do the damn job we were supposed to do for Suda and Cyclo, and then just hope that the heat would blow over. We were all relative nobodies, aside from Gage and Jeremy, but they weren't exactly prestigious. There was a chance we destroyed enough evidence to the point where nobody would even think to suspect us. Time would tell. Besides, it's one CEO in a setting where time can get screwed with just by traveling through space the wrong way. I'm sure they could find a replacement quick enough. A quick and awkward warp trip later, Suda asked us if we'd made good use of our time. None of us gave a real answer. Edward and Jeremy switched spots, as having Derek and Edward fly together felt like a bad idea. We made our final preparations, and after not too long of a time, we flew down to the mission planet's surface. It's better late than never, right? It seemed almost routine at this point. As our ships touched down and we disembarked, the air was hot and sticky. The sounds of unknown flora and fauna radiated throughout the jungle. It was like the last mission in the desert, except more humid. We mounted up in our mechs and began trudging forward. We had a map with a waypoint and a vague idea as to its direction, and while we knew we were looking for ruins and communication systems, we couldn't really read the map that well. It was impossible to tell what kind of surroundings we'd have to cross to get to the area of operations. With every footfall, our chassis disturbed the forest floor. We snapped branches and logs, pushed low-hanging trees aside, and sank slightly into the muddy ground with each stride. We forged a path through the green undergrowth as we soldiered on. Eventually, the party descended into a valley. The dense foliage began to clear as we came upon a flat expanse populated by some plant life with several crumbling buildings. In more desiccated areas, you could see tall, thin spires radiating a periodic blue glow. Cyclo finally radioed us and explained that these spires were the compromised communications equipment. It had uploaded a code that would reset and restore their functionality, but we needed to be in close proximity for the upload to work. Suda joined the channel and quickly interrupted Cyclo with news that it had detected hostile mech signatures in the area. Immediately on guard, the group scanned the area for hostiles. They were hidden either in the woods, the ruins, or both, and we didn't want to find out the hard way. Carefully avoiding the ravenous shrubbery, the ace up my sleeve moved up first. Edward strained his eyes to catch sight of anything and kept his hands tight on the controls. His grip went from firm to white-knuckled when, with a horrible static shriek, his machine staggered and stopped moving with his controls. This did not mean it stopped moving altogether. Edward was powerless to stop his mech from swinging back to face us, shouldering its Cyclone pulse rifle and firing a bolt straight into Jeremy's chest. Reinhardt's suit, which he gleefully named the Showstopper, was thankfully well made. If the shot was cleaner or the suit was weaker, that round would have gone straight through and out the back, destroying the cockpit along the way. All the Showstopper got was a nasty dent. We all heard Edward screaming when the ace up my sleeve started moving without Lee's input, but now it was Jeremy's turn to start shouting. It was shockingly similar to the tongue lashing Edward gave Derek. Jeremy called Edward a traitor, asked how Lee dared to try and kill him, and blatantly ignored Edward's reports that his systems had been hacked. It took Levy and Derek's combined persuasive power to keep Reingard from running over and doing to Edward what Gage did to the SSC CEO's house. Levy was tired of this. They activated their flight unit and shot up into the tree line to get a better look at everything. From their aerial perch, they could see a few of the enemies. There were 4 major buildings in a roughly 2x2 formation, and there was an enemy in the bottom right, 2 in the top right, and 1 in the top left. Concerns were again raised about reinforcements, but Levy reasoned that since they'd done so well handling reinforcements last time, it probably wouldn't be that bad. With objectives set and targets found, Levy gave themselves the go-ahead to kick things off. Keeping relatively low to the ground, the Sky Chaser darted between trees before dropping down into the bottom right building. They unloaded into the unsuspecting enemy, high-caliber rounds punching through the mech's armor and machinery alike. It convulsed as it was thrown into a wall by the maelstrom of gunfire before finally collapsing. Satisfied, Levy locked onto 2 enemies in the building ahead and sent a pair of Shuranga missiles arcing over the wall. The 2 projectiles hit home, but failed to do any significant damage. Unable to do anything else, Levy hunkered down and began to upload Cyclo's code to the adjacent pylon. One of the enemies hit by Levy's missile barrage created a shimmering bubble around the structure, reflecting the sunlight that broke through the canopy in a gleaming display. The mech next to it started chittering and beeping. Edward, seeing that the fight had started, scrambled into cover next to Levy and fumbled with his Cyclone pulse rifle to reload it. It would have been better if he hadn't, because the chittering mech stopped. Again, a horrible burst of static squealing assaulted our ears as the ace up my sleeve decided for the second time that day that friendly fire was actually super cool. This time, Levy was the closest target, and the shot was nasty. Their javelin rockets blew up in the attack, which only added insult to injury. Levy wasn't necessarily close to being incapacitated, but their mech had sure seen better days. Edward profusely apologized while Derek Gage effortlessly made his way up to the closest relay point on the left. He asked us how we were doing and why he didn't see any enemies in his spot. This got him a slew of curses from Levy and Edward, who were busy trying to figure out how to actually kill the enemy instead of ourselves. Jeremy crept forward, hanging back for the most part. He didn't have any fancy ranged weapons, just a shotgun, a sword, and a dream. He needed to find the right time to strike. He needed an enemy to reveal itself. His eyes narrowed, his senses sharpened, and he watched for the hostile area like a hawk. There's a common saying, be careful what you wish for. Reingard's cockpit flashed red as all of his warning systems blared to life simultaneously. He couldn't see anything. He turned around, examining the foliage to find some sort of threat. Then, everything shook violently as he felt his mech stagger. It was like several pieces of his machine were removed simultaneously. Chunks of metal just fell off as Reingard somehow felt the showstopper get slashed in multiple places at once. His eyes caught sight of two glints of light. The first, a razor-thin wire floating through the air. Following the wire's length, he found the second reflection, a hazy figure standing before him. It was almost impossible to make out that it was even there. It had no definable silhouette. The haze in the air quickly dropped as the robot briefly revealed itself. It was shrouded in a thick cloth that obviously aided its cloaking field. In its right hand, it grasped the handle to the wire Jeremy spotted moments before. The bastard had a damned monomolecular sword. Sun rays glimmered off its shiny dark carapace before its stealth systems reactivated and it vanished again. This was bad. Jeremy had to find it, but an invisible enemy with a near-invisible sword was just something he could not deal with. As a fighter, he relied entirely on discerning an enemy's attack patterns and dodging or parrying accordingly. There was no pattern to learn, fighting style to identify, or swing to counter. There was only instinct and prediction. There were also scanning systems, which the rest of the team badgered him to use. He forgot about those. Using his still-functioning optic suite, he was able to discover the cloaked cretin before driving his heavy charge blade into its arm. He wasn't able to fell it in one strike, however, so Jeremy darted towards his teammates while the cloaker again vanished from his sight and systems. He couldn't make it to a building, but at least the rest of us were in range to help if need be. Back to Levy and Edward. Edward got hacked again, but this time the witch only got to attack with his hand cannon. Levy still had to deal with it though. It was starting to get old. Levy needed that hacker gone immediately. Unfortunately, the bubble shield was stopping all of their attacks, so it fell to Edward to finish the job. With Levy providing covering fire, the ace up my sleeve effortlessly crossed the distance to the shielded enemies. Once inside the bubble, Edward hurled an explosive and drew both of his revolvers. Two well-placed high-caliber rounds and a breaching charge hit the Aegis pattern opponent at once, blasting through heavy armor and punching holes in whatever was left. Wrought metal limbs sparked and repair systems whirred. The entire wreck gave off a ghastly wheezing sound as it tried to right itself, before slumping to the floor as the lights of its optics and targeting systems faded into nothingness. Unable to hack Edward's weapon systems again, the witch instead assaulted the ace up my sleeve systems with a technological strike. It temporarily halted its cooling systems and flooded Edward's cockpit with a wave of nauseating heat. However, seeing an opportunity, Levy shot up over the wall and pelted the mech with a blistering amount of firepower. Before it could do anything worse, a missile took off its head, leaving it blind, while a smattering of machine gun fire severed limbs and eventually ripped the cockpit to shreds. Cautiously, Gage started moving from his fortified position near one of the relay points. Levy had identified a hostile's mech signature in the structure ahead, but nobody saw any movement. Jeremy had radioed in to identify an invisible enemy, but that had seemingly come in from behind. The only way Derek was going to find out if an enemy was present was to search the ruins himself. He needed to do it for the sake of the mission. The last objective pylon was in there. It didn't bode well with him. Effectively alone, in a forest, surrounded by enemies, it was starting to feel like he was in real danger. Even if he didn't die here, his career prospects beyond this mission weren't promising, killing a big shot businessman and all. Even if he'd killed the head of a subcontractor, which he hadn't, powerful people were going to be on his ass. Fuck. Why did this have to happen to him? Why did this have to happen now? Lost in thought, Derek Gage hardly noticed the flashing dots on his radar display. In an explosion of violence, a lean mechanized chassis with flat and featureless face came bursting through the wall Derek had just braced against. In both hands it held a large metal ram, cylindrical with a squared-off end that used to pulverize the crumbling rock of the ruins. Before Gage could react, it slung the ram back over its shoulder before holding its arms out towards him. The forearm panel slid away to reveal two shotguns, which it quickly donned in each hand. Luckily, the surprise maneuver had left the breacher with little time to aim, and Derek Gage was nothing if not a slippery bastard. Ducking and diving to the side, the Tiger Blood hit the floor in a tight roll as Derek avoided the twin blast. Responding in kind, Gage swung his heavy charge blade in a counterclockwise arc that cut a deep gash into his foe's leg, chest, and shoulder armor. While Gage and the breacher squared off in melee, Jeremy had finally found his momentum. With one hand on his sensor console and the other on his controls, he barreled through the underbrush while searching for that blighted specter. Finally, an outline of the damned thing appeared on his screen as Jeremy plunged a heavy charge blade and chain axe into its left and right sides respectively. In a sickening scissor motion, the showstopper's weapons worked their way through the specter's chest cockpit. The chain axe and charge blade finally passed each other and the metal frame gave way as both the pilot and chassis were bisected. The The tactical cloak shredded in the chain axe's whirring teeth and sparked as it was thrown into the air. The top half of the machine was almost suspended in the air for a second before slamming to the ground. Jeremy didn't linger on the kill long, but he took enough time to flip off the corpse before taking off to join Gage. Levy was about to fly over and help, but a new target appeared on the radar coming from everyone's left. A small mech with no arms and reverse-jointed legs sprang into view and fired some sort of targeting laser at Levy. A high-pitched beeping sounded in their cockpit as they took evasive action. A digitized voice repeated, "Lock on detected, precautionary measures advised," over and over. With the radar identifying the enemy as a scout class, Levy didn't know what it was going to do with its lock-on, but they decided it needed to die before they would find out. Pausing midair to target the scout and the breacher, Levy let loose a hail of Shuranga missiles. 2 projectiles impacted each mech as Levy darted off to secure the last relay point. With Levy's explosive assistance, Jeremy struck the scout as Derek made another pass at the breacher. In almost perfect synchronicity, the 2 fighters sliced through their respective opponents with their heavy charge blades. Both enemies hit the ground in a collective noise that sounded like a drum set falling down the stairs. With Levy securing the last pylon and Suda messaging us that the ship failed to identify any more enemies, we all breathed a little bit easier knowing that our second job was done. After a hike back to our ships, Suda relayed its new position in orbit, and we flew off-world for some R&R. On the trip up, we took some new licenses as a reward for a job well done. Jeremy Rankard weighed taking a level in Tortuga, but decided against it and decided to take a second level in Blackbeard. In fact, all of us decided to take a second level in our last gained licenses. Levy got a Monarch, Derek got a Metal Mark, and Edward got a Raleigh. It was admittedly awkward downloading the print files for 2 SSC frames when we just committed and it covered up the corporate assassination of an SSC official, but hey, the frontier is an ironic place. What spoiled our excitement was the fact that Suda didn't have any mechanized chassis printers ready on his ship, but our exuberance was renewed when it told us that we had another job in store, and we'd have plenty of time to print new stuff beforehand. See, because of some unmentioned complications in setting up our new assignment, Suda needed us to grab some supplies and info before going to do our real mission. We'd been booked a commercial flight to a special location, from which we'd procure our own means of transport to the actual planet of operation. Suda had got us a fucking layover flight. You can't make this shit up. The ship was a half space liner and half cargo vessel, so we'd be able to keep our chassis in back while traveling in relative luxury. However, what really piqued our interest was the layover planet, Mars, the capital of the Cradle system and the Union at large. It would keep the heat off our backs, hopefully, and provide us with ample opportunities to procure literally anything we'd want. The capital city was a hub for literally anything a Lancer would need, official or otherwise, so we were excited. With high spirits and well wishes, we departed on our flight and settled in for a comfortable ride to Mars. We even got seats in the same row, and security let Ethan on the flight with us. It would be hard to ruin this for us. Regrettably, as the saying goes, life finds a way. Tune in next time to watch everything go wrong. Again. I said that this episode was the one where Derek H fucked everything up, but the level of uh-oh reached in this installment doesn't hold a candle to the shit you're gonna listen to whenever I decide to upload next. Things go colossally wrong, titanically wrong, unimaginably wrong. I am so excited to tell you all what happens. We're playing through this mission at the moment, so I'll finally be caught up writing these scripts too. The Lancers and Losers are going on vacation before their next job, and that vacation is going to be the most memorable outing this side of Hercynia. Tune in next time because these episodes are going to just keep getting weirder and weirder and weirder. You're going to love it, I promise. I say that every episode, but I swear it's going to be phenomenal. Take care.